You see, user experience is imperative to growth. Now, suppose, as hypothetical completely, there was a music streaming app that was free to use but encouraged you highly to get the premium version. And suppose the benefit of getting this premium version was the removal of advertisements. And then suppose after that you realize that all the advertisements are about how you should get the premium version of the product. You're like, what devious trickery is this? Suppose then you decided, all right, I'll get the premium one. And then they're like, haha, you can't do it in the app. Go to a browser and do it. How would you feel? Would you perhaps delete the app? Would you throw your phone into a river? To discuss this very subject, designing for growth, we have the next panel. Let's hear from some of the industry's finest and how you can use design to scale your business. We have with us on the panel Kishore Kumar from Google Pay Design, Saranya Gopinath, who is the co-founder of the Digital India Collective for Empowerment, DICE, Navneet Nair, Director of Design for PhonePe, Dharmesh B.A., Head of Research for Setu, and the panel will be moderated by Chetty Arjun, the Design Manager at Razorpay. Take it away, guys.
Thank you so much, Karan, for the introduction. All right, folks, the second day of FTX, I hope it is as exciting as the first day was. So with me, I have today Dharmesh from Setu, Saranya from DICE, Kishore from Google Pay, and Navneet from PhonePe. I'm Chetty Arjun. I head design at Razorpay. I have a very interesting topic to discuss today. We are seeing a tremendous growth in the entire fintech industry. To put things into perspective, the homegrown UPI, which was what 1 billion transactions, October 2019, this was last year. And in November, after almost 1 year, it has grown to 2.2 billion transactions. That just shows, how much people are, waiting to come online and then transact online. And thanks to the geo effect, the free internet, people are consuming media online, and then very soon they're going to transact online, right? So to design for these tier 2 and tier 3 users, it's not a straightforward game. To discuss just that, I have this panel for the next 40 minutes. I'd like to start the panel with a very interesting question that most designers would agree. Why is design important, especially in fintech, and that too for these users? Kishore, I want to start with you first. You've been doing a great job at Google Pay. You've been gamifying the entire system. Why is design important, and how do you prove that ROI for design?
Yeah, thanks, Shetty, for that question. It's a good question, and a little bit of background before I dive deep in, right? I might be reflecting thoughts of an entire team that works on different aspects and putting it all together. So not all of my own work that I'll be talking about today. But I think the case really for design, I think I can talk about Google Pay specifically. When we started, there were users using some sort of digital payment already, but users were not quite comfortable with digital payments. There was a little apprehension to doing that first digital transaction. Even after demonetization, it didn't quite sit in well, right? So a lot of work we did, and from a design perspective, is one, to build a character for the product. So how do you want to position the product? What is that emotion that you want to evoke? The other is really looking into, like, on the user side and looking at user emotion and trying to really address that one. And to put that in the context of examples is, when we started off, we looked at a lot of products and we thought that there was a space for us to build a product that makes payment a little bit more fun. So yes, payment is very serious. Money is very, very serious. We all take it very seriously, but it doesn't have to be a boring flow. It can be a little bit more fun. You can add a little bit more flavor so that it really rings with the user a little bit better. One example of that, I'll quickly touch on one of the examples on the product, is when you make a transaction on Google Pay, you can put an animation around it to add your emotion to that transaction, right? So when you pay your rent, it feels a little bit different to when you're giving money to someone for Diwali. And that is really designed for us. I think as a product, it's not just a UX challenge, it really is a cross-functional challenge to take an emotion that's associated with a behavior that they already have, to translate that. And that's what really brings in users' trust and that sense of security, which in turn, of course, reflects in your number. A lot of users we talk to kind of like that personalization that they can add, which is why they sometimes prefer to go to Google Pay. And that's how we know we've done our job sort of right, and that's what we take as validation, and that, of course, like you said, shows in our metrics as well.
That's a very interesting thought. I think you've touched upon trust factor. You've also touched upon kind of giving delight to the users. I'll come to this topic. Navneet, I actually want to know from you as to how do you measure design, and while delight is a great factor, the trust value of design is something very important when you consider the tier 2 and the tier 3 users. And I'm sure Dharmesh and Saranya would also agree, backing from their recent research on these new age users. How would you measure design?
So to me, design is far more fundamental. So when we talk about a design, we are truly talking about an enabler. And design can enable multiple things. For example, it can enable businesses to get profit. It can enable businesses to build a community around themselves. It can enable businesses to evoke emotions of delight, like what Kishore was saying. But design fundamentally has to work at the basic level, which is saying that, okay, it is working for the user to provide them, that enables them to help complete the task that they're doing. How do you do that? You do that by understanding and making sure that it is done in the smoothest possible way. But at the same time, this is something that pretty much everybody will do. So Kishore does it at PhonePe, we do it Kishore does it at Google Pay, we do it at PhonePe. So it is basically something that everybody does. So then what happens next is design then becoming the differentiator. And how do you differentiate that? So one of the things that you differentiate is with delight, saying that, okay, I can offer delight to my customer, but still there is a more fundamental, more evolved way of differentiating, which is to say that, okay, providing the right value to the user, both from a point of view of where the value comes out and what is it that the organization stands for. So for example, at PhonePe, we say we are an inclusive organization that is looking at making sure that all our users are progressing in their financial journey. And that is what we want to provide as a value. So whether it is for the cohort, which is an urban cohort, or whether it is for the next billion users, that is the value that we want to make sure carries on. And design is the means by which it carries on. So that is typically what it is. It is an enabler that allows people to achieve goals. This could be business goals for the organization or user goals for the actual users, and how we do it in a fashion that actually conveys the value properly.
Got it. I think that's a very interesting take on design being an enabler. One more thing that you've mentioned, Navneet, while you're answering, was design being a differentiator, right? So Saranya, this is majorly for you, right? So we have seen the next set of users, the tier 2, tier 3 CT users, right? They heavily kind of bank on known brands, like let's say an SBI or a known brand which they actually see on TV ads or somewhere else, right? So to be very honest, how do we see them going completely online to, let's say, a complete mobile banking experience? Because to be very honest, there's a lot of surge in the new banking experiences with, let's say, Jupiter, Epify, and a lot of new age banking platforms are coming up online, right?
Yeah.
And most of these are currently focusing on, let's say, the tier 1 city users who, to be very honest, are spoiled. There's enough choice out there. So how can, coming back to the design being a differentiator, do you see that happening in tier 2 and tier 3? Can design even be a differentiator? Is there a mode for design?
Sure. Am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sherry, for that. And I think, and my perspective is going to be kind of inside outsider or outside insider, because I'm in an industry body and not as close to product as some of these lovely gentlemen. But of course, I've benefited from having a lot of conversations with each of you. But I think to the underlying perspective of what is the tier 2, tier 3s, what is their relationship to good design? First off, I think with the internet, the geographical distinctions are getting slammed, right? That's no longer, the distinction of tier 2, tier 3 no longer is as rigid as it was, let's say, 20, 25 years ago. I think that distinction is gone. What we are seeing focus on is to specific socioeconomic backgrounds or to specific literacy backgrounds. Geography is no longer such a strong indicator of a differentiated customer. And to that extent, everybody should be spoiled for choice, spoiled for design. I think that is a gap that I'm hoping we are getting closer to fill, where it's no longer, like a beggars can't be choosers for any customer in the country, where it's just I have one lending app that I have access to. To your point, I think lending apps have done a fantastic job of because of the huge gap between demand and supply. There's a huge uptake of, let's say, lending apps, which may or may not even be advertised on TV. It's a lot of peer groups which suggest a lending app for me. I have this good experience and that good experience. But that brings us to the larger issue of design. While in lending, you have things like a huge gap between demand and supply, and that's an uptake. In certain other fintech apps or certain other digital banking experiences, design is what is going to make the case for why you should adopt this at all. And bad design will make the case for why I should drop this. For example, for payments, short of COVID, which was an external factor, which is a push factor, not a customer pull factor, it is unhealthy for me to access cash payments. Digital payments for a new consumer to come on board and use digital payments, if not for good design, we aren't making a very good case for why they should adopt it. Their life is going on fine. They're able to interact with their kirana guy. Uncle G loves going and standing in line to make a bill payments. Everything is going on great. So the case for or against using a digital experience is going to rely on design, whether it's with regards to the delight I get, whether it's regard to customer grievance redressal, how that is contemplated. Like, for example, I currently love Google Pay's campaign on, that friction is good effectively, which is something, especially from a UPI and considering fraud and everything. I love that aspect. That yes, convenience and speed, while it is definitely our huge USP, bringing it down to zero is not really a good thing. And so those aspects of introducing, I think all of those aspects rather are very design centric, and it's going to make the difference between bringing on somebody from a completely analog world into a digital world to losing that customer for life. If they have one bad experience, you can be assured that the entire digital ecosystem has lost that customer. Forget about the app. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
I think that was a very interesting point, right? Especially on the trust factor. For example, if someone comes online looking for a particular movie or a TV series on Hotstar or Netflix, and if they don't find it, it's okay. They just had a bad experience and then they drop off. But the moment the payment fails, or if the moment money moves in wrong hands, it just vanishes. You lose the trust on the entire system. I think this is something that we've been discussing for a long time on trust factors and all. And even the ads that you've mentioned of Google Pay kind of mention the same thing, like jaldi karenge, jalbazi nahi karenge, which basically translates to we'll do the payment faster, but not in haste. That's a great point. Dharmesh, you've been at the forefront of the research, especially again, if I were to generalize it, I'd say that the next billion users of India. Now we keep mentioning this term every once in a while, that designing for Bharat, designing for next billion users. How, if you were to generalize it, who are we designing for? Like, what are the traits that we should keep in mind while we are crafting the experiences for these folks? Who are these folks that we're designing for?
Right. So I'll just take a step back and I'll try to answer one question that you had asked before: why design itself? Why design especially helps us in contextualizing technology for different people into their lives, right? So ideally, design will help us integrate whatever financial services that we give to people without necessarily asking them to learn anything new or change anything, how their lives function, right? Now, till now, most of the time for past, let's say till after the mobile technology started growing up, we've been designing only for the top 100 million users, right?
Yes.
Who always, who we could generalize at some level, probably they understand English or their lives can be put in, there is a common denominator that you could bring down to. But that is not true for the rest of the country, correct? So which essentially means I strongly believe there will not be one particular app or one particular service which will rule everything, right? So which means we will have these pockets of different kinds of services for payments, for insurance, for lending, and for investments, who will understand the user deeply and probably contextualize the app for their lives, right? So for example, if you go to a tier 3 city and if you see a self-help group, like a bunch of women who are coming together and trying to do savings and lending among themselves, today the payment system does not work for them.
Yeah.
Okay? So for example, how do I make a system which also acts as a savings and also acts as a lending, right? So that would be a new player who would come and design a system on top of UPI, which specially solves for their problem, right? Also, sir, let's say, for example, Kishore was talking about this delight factor. Okay, so now the delight is also very contextual, right? Today when I'm transferring a money of 10 rupees, the delight kind of makes me happy. Now, will the same user be open to transferring 1 lakh rupees in one shot in Google Pay or Phone Pay without having that fear? Right now, the delight factor there might not necessarily be that nudge for them to do it. Now, for example, somebody could come out and say that, hey, this is a UPI app which is only for high ticket transactions, where they would say that, we will have extremely good customer support and we give you a guarantee that there will be 0% failures. Right? So now this identification of different pockets and different sorts of users across the different social economical sector is what we are essentially calling it as design for Bharat, right? Which means we move away from your top 100 million users and trying to see from their lens as how can we design products which will fit into their fabric of lives. That's what I think.
That's again a very interesting take, right? So I'll push in something from a regulatory standpoint as well, and then I like to kind of pick your brains on it. So if you see RBI kind of pushing, for less than 2,000 rupees or for less than 5,000 rupees also in the recent times, there's no need for an OTP. You can directly go ahead. And then over here with both PhonePe, Google Pay, and rest of online payment industry, we are also kind of enabling payments for the first time experience for person who's coming online for their first time, transacting something for the first time, who's super anxious. On a click of a button, money moves from places to places. And with all of these things where, for less than 2,000, we're going to make your payment even more smoother without OTP. And on the other hand, we are saying that we are going to give the control to you. Until unless you give the PIN, payments are not going to happen. You can take that pause, you can freeze for a second and then do that, right? So how do you balance both of it? Navneet, this is for you. At PhonePe, you design both for the first 100 million users as well as the next 700 million users.
Excellent question, Chetty. I think when you look at this, there are two parts of it. One is the business wants as less friction as possible. Whereas when we are thinking from a user point of view, we know that friction is good because you don't want people to be victims of fraud. So here what happens is typically there is a divide, and there is an imbalance between these two needs. One which is saying that I want less friction, the other one which says I want people to at least take a double look at what they're doing. We need to go with something higher than that. We should say, okay, what is it that they are looking at? So in that case, what comes into play is why are you building the particular app that you're building? Is it something that is to enable businesses to do transactions quickly? That could well be the value that you stand for. Or something like what we do, where we actually want to liberate the flow of money, but at the same time, we also want people to make progress, which means doing things of putting checks and balances to make sure fraud is not happening, making sure that people who are new to the system do encounter a little more friction than what is something that people who are really on the system. So if for example you've been using payment apps for a long time, you already have a wallet account, and you are fine with your merchant wallet, and you would not want to you could pretty much do without a two-factor authentication as well, payments.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the things that you look for. Who is the user who is coming in? What is the situation that is there? What stage of the journey you are in? And fundamentally, why are you building this app? What is the core reason for being in terms of you building this app? So when you put all of these together, you get a very good answer that comes into play. And it is not an easy answer to give, and not a black and white answer. But at the same time, it is not that difficult, and with the right checks and balances, you do get the right answer.
Got it, got it. Kishore, how was your take on this? How do you kind of balance it out?
Yeah, I think we totally agree with what Navneet said. And just to add to that, right, I think it's also acknowledging that not all users are in the same place. They're in different parts of the journey. Their digital confidence, if you prefer, is also at different points. So some of them understand how a transaction works, and understanding some of the nuances feels them in control. So we keep, in most of our design discussions, we keep coming back to that control factor. How do we make sure that users know what's happening? Again, is it happening fast? Is it happening slow? Is one part of it. But regardless of how fast or slow user might prefer, how do we make sure that when someone is making a transaction, they actually know where their money is, and if something goes wrong, or how to resolve that, right? That confidence, it really comes down to that. And then when you take a step back, and when you spoke about design, Dharmesh spoke about designing for the first 100 million, and then the next 700 million or so. How do you make the same product work for both these kind of users? And that really is the design challenge that I think will continue to be with us for a foreseeable future, I think.
Got it, got it, got it. I think someone already kind of touched upon the topic of trust, right? Dharmesh, I want to know from you as to what are these trust markers that people are actually looking in their experience when they come online, be it for, let's say, getting a loan online, or basically, the moment they come digital, what are the trust markers that they're looking for?
There is no standard like set of like a rule book which says that these are the trust markers. What we closely try and see is how do people build trust offline, right? Now in digital, if you look at when we are building screens experiences, we kind of treat them as one persona, quote unquote, right? But individually, everybody in their life, they think I'm a unique person, right? So what essentially happens is when you walk into a bank and you have a branch manager, there is a relationship that is built over a period of time, and he kind of understands. He doesn't only understand who you are, but he also understands where you come from, which caste are you, what's your family like, and all of it. And when he tells that story and then he sells you, this is where you should invest, you're not even trying to look back, right? It immediately creates that trust factor. That sort of a conversation, that sort of a negotiation doesn't yet happen in digital interface, is what I think, right? So that probably is where, rather than building generic flows, is where a lot of your technology, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, we are also very early in the journey, right? As like you said, one day when we hit probably 1 trillion transactions in UPI, we might know about the user much better, and we'll be able to contextually tell them where they should park their money and which kind of insurance they should be taking. But we are at a very, very early stage, and once that comes into picture, trust automatically starts building. But on the other hand, this is another point that I've been recently thinking about is, let's say purely from a design perspective, or a business and product perspective, we think about the certain flows as what we call the primary flows and what we call as secondary flows. And at least in my experience in the companies that I've worked before, the most important flows customer support or trying to get a help desk has mostly been pushed as a secondary flow, because your main flow is where you say that if the transaction is happening, yes, then that becomes a primary flow. For most of the next billion users or the Bharat users, that becomes more important. What if a transaction fails? What if something goes wrong? Now, the idea of what is a primary flow versus what is a secondary flow also needs to change for us to build the trust on the other side of things.
Oh, I think that you've put it in a very, very beautiful way, that, design is not just what you see on the screen, but the rest of the experiences also matter. That's a great thing, right? So speaking from, these research anecdotes, I'd like to know more from Saranya. You've been into the research domain. You've been contacting a lot of these new age users, right? Any personal anecdotes which kind of made you feel this is completely counterintuitive? This is not even thought of, or if I were to put in different words, whatever experiences or whatever UX patterns that we already know, they'll definitely not work with this set of things.
Sure. So, okay, this is actually a story that's not from my research. It's a story that Fred told me from his research a while ago. So I'm going to paraphrase it. I'll try to do it justice as much as possible. So this is several years ago, and it may still, I think it definitely holds good to date. So the research was near Kanyakumari, and my friend was looking, for a digital banking service to try to do consumer study and say what's the uptake, what is the response for this. So he went to a fishing a fishing person's village near Kanyakumari, and he met a fisherman there, and he said, "Okay, how do you bank? How do you save your money? Which is the closest bank you use? What's your favorite investment instrument, and so on and so forth." That man pointed to the ground, and he said, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "There's a pot in the ground. I put my money. It's buried under there. That's my savings product." And my friend was like, "Okay, now you've told me where it is. What if I pick it up and run? What can you do?" He was trying to make a case for formal banking. He said, "You won't go very far. Everybody nearby, all my neighbors are my friends. Before you go 100 yards, they'll catch you and they'll beat you up. You can't go very far." That is their reality. That is the next 100 million customers' reality that they're working from. When my friend prodded further, he said, "Why don't you go to a bank?" Because he's like, "Okay, I cannot make an argument as to why this does not work for you. Why don't you go to a bank?" And he said, "When I go to a bank branch, I don't feel respected." This person, this fisherman, in his own right, is an entrepreneur. He's a proprietor. Even more than me during my complete employment days. There is a strong sense of self-respect. When he goes to a bank branch, if he doesn't innately feel that sense of respect, why should I bother? Especially when I have a working system for me. The reason I bring this up, especially in this conversation, is it is at the core of when we're contemplating building for the next 100 million users. I know that this group especially puts a great impetus on building from a sense of empathy. I think once we're trying to contemplate products or services for the next billion users as a monolith, that they are this singular entity which will act, function, and contemplate the same way. Especially, we do this weird thing of capping their aspirations. Why will you need a loan? Daughter's wedding, son's education, emergency. These are three top things. No, when I save money, I save it for a new laptop. Somebody else in a small city in India may be doing the same thing. So we are, and I understand why. It's because of what everybody is talking about. Of we've kind of perfected the product for the first 100 million users, so we want to get to the next billion quickly. We want to understand this very easily. But that's not how anybody works. I think that sense of respect will translate, because when we're talking about the inclusion journey, I think we have a great understanding of the access problem, whether it's in terms of infrastructure, language literacy problems, and there's great work happening there, and not to belittle it. But the inclusion problem is what I'm a little anxious about when are we going to create products that are made for the next billion users, create an experience that is keeping that next billion user in mind across the spectrum of the users there are. And the way, and I know that a few organizations are already doing great work there, like KaleidoFin, are contemplating products for this particular user segment, as opposed to saying, this is the user, this is the product, I'm going to translate it in Hindi and give it to you, and inclusion success. I think that's what I'm a little more anxious about, because I think there's a lot of work to be done there in wrapping our head around the problem statement as well. With artificial intelligence coming in, with those credit rating systems being put in place, which have worked for a largely consumerism-heavy market, like let's say the United States, using similar systems in India, which is a more savings-heavy market, would it work the same way? I think there are lots of questions to be asked. But the short version is, A, the next billion users are not a monolith. B, I think building for them with a sense of empathy, at the core of which is respect, I think is really what I would like to see. Interesting.
So we've kind of touched upon, more or less the principles of design over here, right from, inclusion to...
Sorry, it's a long answer.
No, that's fair. I think you've touched upon some topics that I really am interested in. Basically, if I were to sum it up, you're talking about, the design principles that we need to keep in mind, right? Could be respect, could be localization with vernacular, or could be personalization with let's say the machine learning algorithms that Dharmesh kind of speak about, right? Let's actually go deeper into these things. Like Navneet, if you were to put in words as to what are the design principles that we need to keep in mind when we are designing, especially in this domain, that too at this age where there is growth tremendously happening.
Yeah, so I love the example that Saranya, the anecdote was amazing in terms of how things work in the real world. So one of the things that I feel really works for the products that we have today is that in some sense it's if we build it right, it can be egalitarian. It doesn't really put a bias as to who is coming in to use it at the first point of time. My fear is that some of these biases might get introduced once we have more artificial intelligence coming in and we have more of the data that is coming in, to say that privileged people might get a head start on the platforms. But today, as of now, the way we are, we really don't have so much of a differentiation that is brought into it. And this is kind of very evident in platforms like when TikTok was available. It was pretty much the tier 2, tier 3 that was making the best use of that platform.
Yeah.
And I feel that when we start building these platforms, that is what we need to go in with, saying that we should be inclusive, egalitarian to begin with, and the personalization can come in, and it can come in at a point where as much of the biases are removed as possible. And that is a tough one because human beings are inherently do have biases that are latent, not necessarily coming out outwardly. And as designers, we may have to really work hard, not just as designers, as the business itself, and as product managers, and as engineers. We should make sure that none of these biases really surface out when we start introducing artificial intelligence and machine learning into our systems.
Interesting. Dharmesh, your take on the principles of design that we need to keep in mind.
I'll just add upon one thing in addition to what other folks have spoken. Especially in fintech, one design principle that would be very, very interesting to bake into the flows or the activities is the ability to educate a user into doing what they're doing, right? So, for example, if you're building an e-commerce, traditionally people have been shopping for a long time, right? So when you're building an e-commerce, all you're doing is you're taking an offline mentor model, trying to do it in an online way. But when you're trying to do like a mutual fund or an investment or a loan, probably people haven't even had access to these products offline, and they're doing it for the first time online. So it's not only about helping them get the service, also helping them understand what is the service that they're enrolling for. When you talk about it, I'm talking about all the pros and cons put upfront. Right? So because in the digital world, there is a high possibility of creating the dark patterns. We should take a step back and see what is useful for the user, which goes back to the previous point I was talking about, like to build honest relationships with the users by educating them is one of the basic design principles I would think we should start seeing.
Got it. Kishore, your take.
Yeah, I want to take a step back, and I think acknowledging that the next 700 million or the next billion users that we will design for, especially in the context of India, they're going to be very, very different. And I think that one principle I keep going back to is a lot of things that have been tried and tested in some other countries or other contexts, just reminding ourselves that that might not work. Again, not to say that that will definitely not work, but the rules are different. The playground is very, very different. We spoke about inclusion, we spoke about bias, we spoke about dark patterns. We are now looking at users who are very, very different from some of the users who we have already designed for. Again, we spoke about US, and when we look at India and US, India completely skipped the plastic card era. Right? We went from cash to digital. India is now arguably one of the fastest mobile internet, cheapest mobile internet. This is a very different world. It's a very different user who we're designing for. So just telling ourselves that we cannot replicate the playbooks to this user, and just reminding ourselves and building that empathy and making sure that we strive to build that empathy. I think that's what I keep coming back to over and over again. Again, today we mostly spoke about the consumer experiences, but there are other cohorts we are designing for it. There are small businesses that we're designing for, and all of them are functioning very differently. So just reminding ourselves that is often the design principle that I keep coming back to.
Got it. Interesting. So the five of us have seen tremendous growth in the last 6 years, and we've grown with the industry. With governments pushing for getting bank accounts, and whenever you go to a Sabzi Mandi, look for the QR, pay with QR, get RuPay cards, right? We've personally seen, and even the Razorpay numbers that we have show the same thing. Number of people who will shop online is going to double in the next couple of years, and that's a great number to work with, right? But all of these experiences need not just stick to, let's say, a mobile or let's say, web-based experiences. Especially on the tier 1 stage, you have all of these voice-based, payment experiences kind of coming in with a lot of digital assistants sitting right next to your room. What are you personally excited for? What's next for designers in this space, Saranya?
I'm a little okay. I'll get the pessimistic view out of the way, and then I'll let the gentleman take it forward as to how to be optimistic about it. I think there are definitely multi-sensory experiences in the offing. I think there are lots of, and many of them are going to help push the access problem, whether it's voice helping like a language literacy basis, or whether it's going to be helping people who are differently abled. I think there are lots of experiences where technology is going to be a great driver to help address the access problem, and we're seeing it being used in other ecosystems, getting it into something as principally as fintech, which is possibly the most urgent need-based experience with which we are delivering technology to millions of Indians. I think seeing it kind of manifest over there would be very, very interesting. Having said that, my pessimistic view is I would still like to see, and I'm sure the product guys should disagree with me over here, of stabilizing, let's say, things like customer grievance, redressal, and some of those experience. I would like to see it scale along with it. Because as an industry body, our focus is twofold: trust and scale. Everything we do is tested across these two objectives. And even in pushing for UPI, and as much as, like on our Twitter page, every month we kind of broadcast the UPI numbers. A great vanity metric. But again, my underlying thing is I hope that scales along with it stronger operating systems, stronger backend systems, and it's not just the transaction numbers going up, which of course is brilliant on its own, but seeing also kind of like a cautious growth. Is what I would like to see with all of these systems come in. But yeah, that's it.
It is interesting. Yeah. Navneet, your take on it. What are you looking forward to in this space?
So I completely agree with Saranya on the fact that the pace at which the product grows, definitely the user support should grow. I think more than that, it is also just the way the apps are able to handle failures should also become much better, so that the whole trust in the system increases and people don't have to think twice about having to use the system. They know that it just works, and that is the state to which the entire ecosystem should be reaching for us to move forward. Because while there is, we are making a 50 rupees payment and our attachment to that 50 rupees is a certain level, when you go down, the 50 rupees matters much more to people, and that is what we need to be concerned about and make sure, like Dharmesh was saying, education, trust, and making sure that they are held through the entire journey and never at any point feel that they're being cheated of anything.
Got it. Interesting. Also, we are running kind of late on the schedule, so I'd like to take one customer question, one audience question, sorry. So there's one thing, with most businesses prioritizing shorter flows and faster routes to conversion, which makes sense in affording growth in tier 1s. But as Dharmesh and Saranya pointed out, this pattern probably breaks in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, something that we've kind of touched upon. Where the focus should be slowly fostering trust and building up the intent and customer and making the user aware, reassuring them at each stage. How does design as a function accommodate these kind of flows, which might appear counterintuitive given common knowledge of business? Kishore, would you like to take a stab?
Yeah, I think one thing we keep coming back to is there's short-term success and long-term success. And often the difference between doing right by the user and heavily optimizing for a business often is one will lead you to short-term success. So if you make your flow really fast, blazing fast, yes, that will give you some short-term success. But over time, are you able to ensure that users trust in your product? So that often is the case that I think we designers can make. We often keep going back to. Some product teams are more evolved in terms of understanding that others. So we constantly see that one. But the other is really, I think this validation is also does not necessarily fall through metrics either. Sharina spoke about support. Your support will always show how much users are not able to achieve what they intended to achieve. So again, I hesitated to believe that design is not in conjunction with the metrics. I think they often sit together, but it's often about what metrics we look for. Again, customer support cannot be a cheap affair for any of these products. It is a very valuable resource and it's a very valuable segment. So you could potentially have good design, build the trust with the users, and still benefit on the metrics front and on the business front at the same time.
Got it. All right, folks. Thank you so much for being so candid about it. Thank you so much for the anecdotes that you've shared. Also for the audience, there's a tweet button right there at the bottom of your screen. Post your insights, something that you've learned from FTX or from this session. Don't forget to tag hashtag FTX2020 while you do that. Thank you so much again, the panelists. This was a very nice session, and I don't think 40 minutes is enough for us to delve deeper into all of these topics. We've kind of touched upon almost every single thing that we daily discuss. We've touched upon inclusion, we've touched upon the next billion users, we've touched upon machine learning, we've touched upon experiences where we need to, principles we need to keep in mind while designing for these experiences. Great talking to you, folks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Stay
Jyoti.
home, stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much for it.